Hello and welcome to the CDW Canada Tech Talks podcast. I'm your host, KJ Burke, Field CTO for Hybrid Infrastructure at CDW Canada, and I'm joined today by Joseph Reele. He's the VP of Solutions Architects at Schneider Electric, and Martin Bazinet, who is the Solutions Architect Director at AWS. So thanks for joining me, guys. I really appreciate it. What we want to talk about today is a little bit about, the drivers and the reasons why we seem to be growing workloads in our data centers and in the hybrid, in the public cloud at such a rapid rate. And then, and Joe, we really want to talk to you about how are we maintaining that growth? How are we dealing with that, at a macro level, because it seems to be, happening so quickly. So appreciate it. And I want to start off with a couple of introductions. So Martin, if you want to talk a little bit about yourself and your role at AWS and the team that you lead.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first let me say thank you for having me here today. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you. So my role, I lead the solution architecture team for Canada. Mm-hmm. I've been with AWS for the last 5 years. I'm based out of Montreal. It's been a really great experience to be part of that journey for the last 5 years, just growing and seeing the cloud adoption. Mm-hmm. Maybe just a little bit about me. Before that, I was with Dell Technologies. I was leading all Eastern Canada for Dell Technologies in terms of storage, compute, consulting. And before that, I have some experience in consulting myself. So that's a little bit about me.
All right, cool. Yeah, and AWS, and we'll kind of get into it, but some of the investments that have been made there, the Calgary region, and so we'll kind of talk about how that's changed
Absolutely.
things. And then Joe, talking to you at Schneider Electric, Vice President of Solutions Architects across North America, could you tell me a little bit about yourself and your role at Schneider and the team that you lead?
Yeah, so thank you very much, KJ, Martin. It's great to be with you and all of you in the audience too. Hi. Thank you very much. I'm Joe Reele. Like KJ said, I serve as Vice President of Solution Architecture here at Schneider Electric. My background is in mission critical facilities ever since I was an adult. So I started off in the United States Air Force nuclear program. And from there, I had the honor and the privilege to serve as a senior executive at Bank of America, responsible for global data centers, design, build, change, problem, risk, and compliance management globally. I'm a young man with no hair as a result. And I've been at Schneider Electric for 12 years now, going on 13, and really working with clients like Martin and AWS, and really trying to figure out kind of this whole complicated world we want to call data centers, cloud, and this evolving landscape that is upon us now.
Yeah, I really appreciate both of you guys being here. I think, one of the unique things about the podcast is I get to talk to thought leaders and like yourselves. And Joe, with some of the acquisitions that Schneider's had, you guys are really covering a large space in power and cooling now that is definitely differentiating. So I think your viewpoint here will be great. So when we look at kind of how we got to the point that we're at, when I was a data center technician with, I still have my hair, but I've got more gray in the beard, unfortunately. We were looking at, 1200, 2 kVA, racks, 4 kVA was pretty high end. Now all of a sudden I'm talking to our Studio Cloud group, and we're talking 70 kVA a rack, 80 kVA a rack. And so Joe, what are you seeing with these larger scale deployments? When you work with AWS and hyperscalers, what is kind of that range of power and infrastructure really driving to those facilities?
Yeah, it's a great question. If we kind of back up, like you were talking about, rack density in particular what's that 2 and maybe 5 average worldwide, and by the way, let's not forget the size of the data center back then too. 5 megawatts was incredibly large, and 10 megawatts was huge. And now it seems like nobody gets out of bed for less than 100 megawatts. So if we, start there, the growth in our industry, I kind of look at it really simply like we went from analog to digital, now we're on to autonomous. That's high-level language, but think about a cassette tape to a CD, now to a playlist generated based on your likes, and that's kind of the transition that we've been going through. Now, what does that mean? Well, power requirements, both in the size of the data center, right, have gone up. You mentioned, KJ, right away, the density within the rack has also gone up. And so this has created a lot of challenges. Really, if you want to look at it at a very high level, abstractly, from the grid all the way to the plug, right? So there's grid constraints, whether it's transmission or distribution. There's challenges in how do I get to 70 kilowatts? And when you ask, what are we working on today? 70 kilowatts is actually probably on the lower end a little bit. And specifically speaking in training or AI, we're looking at 130 kilowatts per rack. Totally different application, obviously, than cloud, but this influx of technological changes and advancements, coupled with the growth and needs of power. Let's not forget network either. All of this has required a significant amount of enhancements, solutions, in order to solve these things, from power distribution to cooling. Martin will get into the technology changes and everything else that's driving hybrid cloud. Now it's hybrid cloud, maybe with an AI slant to it even, right? And so wow. And so this is, but here's the good news. Let's not disaster fantasize here. With great companies like Amazon, CDW, Schneider, and others, these challenges are being solved. These challenges are being worked on, and at a high level, we're moving from point products to solutions. And with that, I'll sort of leave it and throw it back at you, KJ and Martin, and see what you think about all that.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think you're right. I think that solutions, and so when we look at the drivers, like Joe, you mentioned the needs. When we look at the needs of the business, a lot of it's being driven by the project. It's being driven by the need for the business to build and develop solutions for their customers faster. And so Martin, when you look at and your team works with the business side, they're not worried about the infrastructure that's underlying necessarily. They're worried about, well, how do I get this to market faster? How do I move quicker? How do I deliver value? So what are some of those conversations that you're having that are really, driving the need to grow and scale quickly?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. One of the particularities of my role that I really appreciate is my team get to work with customers from all industry, all across the country. And if you think about it, from the startup up to the large enterprises, we really see a lot of commonalities in terms of the business drivers that requires customers to evolve. And some of those business drivers are, obviously the need to innovate, densification, more performance, getting closer to the edge, more resiliency, and really, that's really bringing AWS to expand the boundary on a constant basis. This is why we'll be talking about expansions and how we're growing. Right now, I think we've grown up to 108 availability zone across the globe, 34 regions. Just recently, this year, we've grown in Canada. We've made a major investment in Canada West, where AWS is investing $4 billion up until 2037, and we've added a region. And that region is a full region of 3 availability zone. And we're seeing unexpected demand, right? We did that for our Canadian customers, especially the customers that had data regulation requirement and data privacy. but we're seeing massive adoption from like large ISVs, telcos. So the business driver are really out there, and there's an urge to add more and more constantly on the private cloud.
Yeah, and I think that demand to grow, that demand to scale quickly, what I find interesting and why I was really excited to have you kind of talk to the listeners today, is that if you think about it, your business is trying to grow, they're trying to grow quickly. AWS is trying to grow at the speed of hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of businesses all trying to grow in that availability zone like at the same time. So it's, yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting sort of nuance. So to kind of continue with that, one of the big things that we've noticed is the way that we architect applications has changed in such a way that by improving the network, by improving our accessibility of those cloud services, we've been able to do more in the public cloud, but deliver services at the edge. How has the availability of SD-WAN, how has the robustness of the network, how has being in a new region, say in Canada, how has that changed the way that the applications are developed and the types of conversations that your team has with customers?
Yeah. Well, like first thing, I think we need to meet our customers where they are. Like they're all into a different place in terms of their journey, and they have different set of applications. They have a different set of business requirements. So for that end, like we have multiple solutions in terms of helping them build their architecture and build their applications. So that's why you're going to see us invest into more than just into the services. We're investing into connectivity to reach their customers there where they are. So we're making continuous investment into our direct connect capabilities and adding capacity there. We're able now to go up to 400 gigabytes of connectivity up to customer data centers to meet there where they are. We're seeing an increasing demand on mobile connectivity. We have like 5G capability as well. And maybe recently we've announced Project Kuiper. I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but Project Kuiper is like is launching a constellation of satellites, over 3,000 satellites across the planet, to make sure that we are able to always reduce that last mile with our customer wherever they are, and help him drive innovations constantly.
Yeah, it's a good point. And then Joe, when hyperscalers like AWS or organizations that have these large data center footprints, as they consolidate more, that obviously changes the requirements that the underlying infrastructure needs in order to service those needs. And so as we've had more consolidation, what are some of the things that you've seen? You mentioned the total power and the total need of those data centers. What are maybe some of the other things that are challenging within that infrastructure as it scales to that size?
Yeah, good question. I think that you can bucketize it really if you want into power, cooling, and network. Okay. And the reason why I suggest you bucketize them is that there are, and Martin can get into more specifics on it necessarily, but there are differences in the way the network is architected today, which drives the way the IT kit is laid out, which compresses. And as you compress IT, you compress electricity, and as you compress electricity, you compress heat. And so we have new network architectures, both in and out of the data center. Martin touched on that, right? He mentioned mobility. He mentioned satellites. He mentioned go to where the clients are, right? So we see different architectures and techniques and solutions in the network. Power, high density power, and the way that it is distributed, the way that it is even, I'll call it articulated. All right. Have we ever heard about new battery energy storage? Have we heard about solar? Have we heard about wind? Have we heard about potentially nuclear? And so compressing power into, if I had to power a 5 kilowatt rack versus a 100 kilowatt rack is a different power architecture, right? Cooling technology as well, liquid cooling. And I will say this too, because I think it's a very important to mention. I know Martin and AWS, along with many, many others, there's a sustainability component with all this as well. Right? It's not only to grow and move to where the clients are and to serve the needs, but it's also to do it in a more sustainable way. And I think some of the stuff, the technological benefits that Martin and his team bring to the world starts to equal some of that sustainability, right? It's not always is it green power, it's maybe how that application works and the efficiencies that application drives creates great efficiencies which drive sustainability. So that's kind of what I would, give that answer. 3 different ways to think about it, 3 different moves in technology to solve that.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to break it down. And yeah, I've always looked at it where power, although at the scale that it's at is challenging. Power always seems to be the easier of the numbers until there's just not enough power. Cooling's always been a tough one, and yeah, we're definitely seeing a lot. We'll kind of get into, I think, some of the technologies as we work through that. So one of the things you mentioned there, I think, Joe, just to touch on it, is that economies of scale. So, what are some of the things that we've done up to this point to, try to, build at scale and take advantage of? I'm thinking some of the, immersive cooling. Like, what are some of the things that you've seen that we've deployed up until now that have helped, solve some of the challenges that we have, at scale?
Probably not an answer everybody would expect here. In the past, there's been almost a wall between sort of IT, network, storage, facilities, power, cooling. What we've seen now, we mentioned at the very beginning, solution-oriented, meaning that we're starting to look at within the rack itself and building outward. And what is this? This takes the community, it takes the village to work together in order to do that. So to answer your question, what we're seeing a lot of is this bridge, this merge of these unbelievable subject matter experts that were in the past almost think of the Kentucky Derby, the best athletes in the world in an individual lane with blinders on. Network over here runs, power over here runs, and so on and so forth. And what we've seen today with great leaders like Martin and CDW companies is coming together as forming an ecosystem and working together to optimize and create efficiencies. This creates the at scale, okay? This creates the ability to do things at scale. And let's say at scale also means quickly. See, because before, the data center was an old dinosaur type of industry. The technology needed to be on the market for 10 years, and maybe we would think about it. And now today, right? Now today, because of all this working together, technology solutions and what ifs are becoming more a reality. And because those what ifs become more a reality, efficiencies are gained. And the last thing I'll say is, it used to be where, think of an automobile. If you don't have tires on the automobile, it doesn't matter what the automobile is. The automobile is going nowhere. So when we think about power, cooling, and network, think of that as the wheels or the tires to the automobile. We can talk about technology all day long, but if you don't have wheels to drive it, it goes nowhere. This is why the story of the ecosystem is working. This is why we see positive momentum and positive improvements in efficiency, scale, and services that the data center community worldwide is being offered to clients. This is led by Amazon, CDW, and people like Schneider working together in harmony.
Yeah, so Martin, as Joe's kind of talking about the tires of the vehicle, there's the rest of the vehicle as well, and I think in some ways we've changed the way that the vehicles are built. They're built very quickly, very agilely, and not always built for the long haul. It could be short stints that you actually use that. What are some of the trends that we've seen from the way that we build applications that affect how we the underlying infrastructure that we require?
Yeah, I mean, I want to start with going back to some of Joe's talking point there, because I think they're very important, and we do have some perspective on that. So Joe touched on sustainability, which is like really important, and one way that we think about sustainability is, in many cases, like customers, it's getting to be an increasing priority for customers. Like it's a priority at the board level. We're even seeing a lot of businesses in Canada that are startups that are investing into climate tech. Like climate tech is getting to be a new industry that we're seeing a lot of promising customers evolving towards there. So that we see sustainability as infrastructure is in many cases a good proxy for customers on how they address sustainability. So if you think about it, if you have a dedicated infrastructure that runs 24/7, that is not necessarily efficient, that's a good proxy to say, well, is the architecture that I'm doing as that economy of scale on efficiency and sustainability? And in many cases, like if you had a choice to say, well, instead of having dedicated servers, if I'm able just to get a server where I'm paying for the consumption that I'm doing at the microsecond level, you might reduce that footprint drastically. So that's one way that we're looking at economies of scales in terms of sustainability. The other aspect of economy of scale that you talked about, like there's many currency there in terms of economy of scale. Like one currency is obviously cost. So like cost, we believe that AWS, because we have that scale worldwide, it's really like we're able to drive down our costs because like we have that supply chain that is, like we're able to do things very efficiently and translate back those savings back to our customers. But the last currency that is very important in terms of economies of scale is agility and efficiency. And when at the speed where we need to innovate and our customers need to innovate, when you want to trial and experiment a new technology, if you need to wait 8 to 12 weeks to have your equipment being delivered, provisioned, turned into your environment, that translates as well into speed to market, speed to value for organizations. And in that perspective, the public cloud bring a lot of those economies of scales of like pure cost from a sustainability perspective, but also like cost of like quick innovation.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think when I look at, I hadn't really considered that the being able to spin up in the cloud was also, because we talk about how if I go to build in a new region, I go to build in a new area of the world, I think about the time to get equipment, the time to do that. I don't necessarily think of that in the when I do get that set up, there's probably a certain amount of waste that's there. Like I'm running, switches that have extra ports that I probably don't need. I'm running, a SAN when maybe I don't need all of that equipment. And so I think that's an interesting thing. The other thing I think that's really interesting is where organizations can rely on the sustainability and the green energy that their suppliers have available. So for instance, if I'm an organization, it's a lot of times IT has trouble sort of hooking into those sustainability metrics. But if I have a downstream partner like AWS, like Schneider, and I'm optimizing the footprint through automation orchestration, then it's a way that I can align my IT consumption with the sustainability as a measurable goal too. So I think that's really valuable. So Joe, when we look at what are some of the symptoms of building in this traditional manner that start to show up, and we're going to kind of get into what's changing here next, but up until this point, if I'm going to build things, as you mentioned, kind of back in the dinosaur days, how is that going to continue to manifest problems? And then as we kind of move forward, we can say, well, this is why we're changing and this is what we're doing. But if we continue to build the way we're going to build, first of all, is it going to work for us? Or what are the things that are, what are the things that are going to cause the wheels to fall off the car?
Good question. And a provocative one too, by the way, and which is awesome. Look, I think the data center industry as a whole, going all the way back, recognizes today that there are opportunities to do things differently and do things better. In the past, I'll give you some examples, just high level. Most all data centers, I don't care who you were, hyperscaler to enterprise to colo, most everybody built one thing. Okay, what do I mean by that? So at Bank of America, we built a tier 4 data center. The entire data center, all data centers were tier 4. It wasn't a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. The reality is only 20% of the load requires never off power. But yet, and by the way, and same thing, and almost up to this point, right, is that Colo built one thing, 4 to make 3, whatever it is. Hyperscale, same thing. All right. You talked about waste. I think about the ports that you mentioned, just to abstractly connect the two. Do I really need all of that redundancy when only 20%? Well, that's the way we did it. So the industry also recognized, even way back when, we came up with a metric called PUE. Prior to that, there was no common metric to sort of measure the performance of each data center. But the track record of, we started to measure and it was high, and with the work of Amazon, IT, others, in the ecosystem, including how it's operated, that PUE has gone down over time. Are we all the way to where we need to be today? No. Do we build things today like we built things in the past? No. There are regulations that are driving things like economization, restricted water use, permits for generators and air quality permits, density, the technology that cools, the technology that allows energy to be used, whether it's battery energy storage or solar or wind. These are all things that were never is a strong word, that were very rarely contemplated, hardly ever deployed, and never at scale. Onesie, twosies maybe. So I'll leave you with, before we get into what's changed, but we don't do things today like we did it before. And I would say hats off to the industry for recognizing areas of opportunity to improve and enhance. I would say if there was one word with a hyphen that could be summarized, both on the IT, the compute, the network, the storage, the facility, the power, the cooling, I would say the word right-sized.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because I think as you're trying to drive towards those efficiency goals, as you're trying to drive towards sustainability, eliminate waste. I think you're right. Like you can't build, like not every building block should be the same size. So I think that's valid. And then, Martin, when your team is trying to help organizations, innovate and grow and be agile, I think this is one of the drivers for why a lot of organizations like lean on public cloud is because you've had to sort of redesign the way things are done from the ground up to support agility. But what are some of the challenges when your team starts working with a customer for the first time? Maybe they haven't moved a lot of stuff into the public cloud. What are some of the challenges that traditional way of building in the co-location and the data center sort of manifests and causes barriers?
Yeah. By the way, I really agree as well on right side. I think it's one of the value of the cloud, right? Like you're not overbuilding, you're not provisioning for your peak season where like we're just about to get into Black Friday this next weekend, and like some of our customers will achieve a peak of about 2x, 3x, 10x the usual volume they get. So that ability to scale and being elastic to the exact right size of what you're going to get is really important, a big value for our customers. So I mean, in terms of like the primary reason, or like what's kind of the big mental shift from like the traditional to where customers are experimenting with the cloud, I think that one of the prime value there is really the functionality, like having access to all those functionality that are there, that you can experiment, you can work with them and fail fast if it doesn't work without, that massive spend and capital and time to innovate toward those new technology. It's one of the key driver. The other key driver there on how they need to think differently is about security, like all those tools and functionality that the public cloud brings in terms of securing your own environment and how you think about securing each workload at the different requirement they have. We have more than 300 features of security that is available now, which is typically not what you would get into a traditional environment. And the last one is really about changing the roles of your organization. Like if you look at AWS, like the size of the organization that we've built and the operational that we've put behind, just to give you a lens, like we are doing about 140,000 deployment per day in terms of software release. That's more than like almost 2 deployment per second on any given day. So it really allows our customers to rethink about like what's the role that they want to have into their organization. Is this where they want to have their people working on those type of keeping the lights on and operationalizing, or having their team work on really differentiative activities for their organization and really allocating the resources where it matters the most to innovate. And I can finish on like Joe, like said, like that one word. Like for me, that one word for organization is innovation. Like there's really only one long-term differentiation for organization, and it's innovation. If you stop innovating, then you become obsolete and you don't have the right level of productivity. So I think that's how like changing the way that the organization have been working traditionally allows them to innovate at a much quicker pace.
Yeah, I like that. So right-sized innovation is what we end up with. So I know it's great. So when we take a look at so to pivot, kind of that, let's go from what some of the challenges are, kind of where we got to, and this is where I think the AWS story is really strong, because I think you've innovated faster than a lot of other organizations. But when we look at the infrastructure across the public cloud in our private data center, and we look at the types of workloads. We already mentioned AI. I mean, but like, what are your, when your team is meeting with customers and talking about new projects, new workloads, what are some of those high-end workloads that are then putting more strain on the back end of your infrastructure?
Well, I mean, it varies. Like more and more, like with AI arriving on board, and like obviously customers wants to like leverage AI as much as possible. That is for sure one of the workload that is there. But more and more customers wants to take AI and build them into their key and critical applications. So we're seeing some of the more operational aligned workloads really specific to each industry being bring into the cloud as key workload. And now I think it becomes a question for our customers of how do I properly build those architectures for those strategic workloads on the cloud. And it brings questions around compliancy, it brings questions around resiliency, and those are all characteristic and challenges that my team is helping customers solve for and build the right architecture in the cloud.
And then Joe, your team's being called in to help, build and architect these large scale, deployments, get the tires on the car so that we can move forward. What are some of the workloads that are jumping out when your team is trying to scope and build at the scale that the very large enterprises are trying to do in their co-location or at the edge of their deployments?
Yeah. So it's I'll say it like this: every industry. It's indicative of kind of what Martin was talking about as well. Every industry starting to look like a data center, right? Meaning like whether you're banking or retail or whatever, you need a digital kit. You need something in the digital world or in the IT world, right, to do it. And so as much as there is great work and we touched on this on the greenfield side, I think what you're talking about here is on the brownfield side. So a lot of the clients that have existing data centers, whether it's colo, whether it's hyperscale, whether it's enterprise, they're all brownfields, right? And technological shifts require a little bit change in that density. So how do I figure out, can I support that workload in that environment? Okay, and I think what we're seeing, and again, working in partnership also with Amazon and CDW is again, it's a couple of things. Can everybody afford to build their own data centers to retrofit everything?
Yeah.
Okay. Does everybody have the bench of expertise that CDW brings to the table? Does everybody have the bench and expertise, the know-how, the technology, the equipment in the ecosystem that Amazon does? And does everybody have the same bench and expertise on power electronics and all that other type that Schneider does? And the answer is no. Okay, so how do those clients and those industries stay competitive with the lack of that bench? And the answer is they partner with CDW, Amazon, Schneider to architect, and I'm going to use that word, this solution, that ecosystem. And a lot of times we see that as a hybrid. What I mean by that is, perhaps local on-prem with Amazon working and helping and develop them that way, as well as a bridge to and a deployment in the cloud, whether it be public or private. Okay, and this is how, and this is what we're seeing, and this is how we're solving it. Okay, it's not always about the greenfield. And I think it's equally important to make sure that we talk about, because again, this is where the tremendous value of Amazon, CDW, Schneider come, is helping our clients who have existing environments migrate and move at the speed of light with agility into those new environments, so that they are, and I love what Martin said, they create the business value and the differentiation for their business, and they're going to rely on CDW, Amazon, and Schneider to help them do that. So I hope that it's probably not the answer everybody's looking for, but I think that's actually, that's what we're seeing and how we're sort of acting as a community.
Yeah, I think that's good, and I think you brought up something we really hadn't talked about, which is the brownfield side of things, and so we can't ignore the fact that there's an existing infrastructure where I'm sure from AWS's side, like you've got data centers that are technical debt in some ways because they weren't built to the modern standards that you have, and organizations have the same problem. So I think that's really interesting, and yeah, not everything is a greenfield deployment, unfortunately, and so yeah, so I think there's innovation, as you point out, Martin, but it's also innovating with what we have in some cases, not just innovating from a net new perspective. So I think that's a great thing. So we mentioned AI a couple of times. So Joe, question around AI. Has AI already changed the way that your team is starting to build out data centers, even if AI isn't one of the workloads that your customer is initially identifying.
Yes, it's not only changing that, it's also, and Martin used the word innovation. It's also causing and spurring a lot of innovation in technology and solutions. Okay, and yes, because nobody on the planet is going to suggest that the density in the compute workload is getting lighter. Okay, so then the focus is on, and maybe we should use one other word as a buzzword. So we got right size, we got innovation. I think adaptability and flexibility is also really key here, because when we work with Amazon, and what we're solving for is how do I build something right size today, but has adaptability and flexibility to support the future as well. Okay, and I think when you think about that, I bet you Martin will tell you, hey, when you think about it in those terms, if we had a blind eye to that adaptability and flexibility, I don't think the solution would be the same, because we're not thinking about that. But Martin and his team are really focused on working with the client to make sure they understand where that vision, where that roadmap is for them, so that they design a solution that adapts into the future, but effectively right-sized, cost-effective, it can solve today's problems. Okay, so that's what we are doing, and we're doing that across 3 domains. As a company, Schneider, power, cooling, and software. You know, Schneider Electric, I think, is one of the largest software companies in the world, believe it or not. And that software, that digital thread from the grid to, in fact, the workload, okay, is really important. And I'll leave you with this. If you were to ask everybody today, most people would suggest that data centers are a grid destabilizer. They suck in so much power and this, that, and the other thing. Data centers of today and facilities, well, the data centers starting today and into the future, and facilities of today and into the future, become more grid interactive. And what does that mean? That means that the facility itself and the workload within that facility can work, communicate, and work with, in conjunction with, the grid, whether that is a microgrid or whether that is the centralized grid. Okay, and this thought on really, let's call it energy management mapped to productivity management, because that's really important here. Okay, this is the discussion, not only with the IT clients, but in fact the utility and the interconnect people. So I wanted to mention that, because I think that's really kind of important. And Martin could probably talk a little bit about some of that, where workload flexibility, as you talk about dialing up or dialing down density based on need or time of year, this is, if you abstractly think about that, ability to do that seamlessly and being able to shift things as needed sometimes, starts to allow this energy landscape, this harmonization of energy, power, and then value back to our communities. And I think that's the important part, that we're all here to serve clients. We're all here to serve our community, and that community is sometimes the people that are connected directly to the data center. Oftentimes it's always the people that are in and around that data center in that community. And this sort of bridges all together as we look about, and as we think about, and as we work with our executives in our client base on how they're thinking about designing and building today and into the future.
Yeah. So what's interesting there, one of the takeaways that I hadn't really thought about is we think about workloads, and we think about the way that we maybe run on-demand workloads, or maybe we, not every workload is a real-time workload. We can process things after hours. I'm almost envisioning, Joe, a tier of a workload within the public cloud that it, when it's off-peak hours, I can operate that at a cheaper rate. So
Yeah.
so I think that level of flexibility, when you're talking about being able to draw lineage from what is the demand on the grid in real time, what is our power availability, where do we have excess, and how can we do that. And we've had that conversation around AI workloads because it's such a high cost workload. One of the questions is, do you really need to run this right now? Do you need an answer in seconds, or is this something that you can take away and deliver the answer, a couple of days from now? And that really allows us to kind of what we talked about earlier, right size the infrastructure that's running that. So Martin, one of the things that you mentioned was really around that AI is kind of a part of all of these different conversations. And so if AI and inferencing is such a heavy load on the infrastructure, has your team started to have conversations with customers around what does that mean for their cloud footprint? What does that mean for, so you can add AI to everything, but you're adding a high-end workload to what you're doing with your customers. Is that part of the conversation today, or will it be tomorrow?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I agree. Like it is part of everyday discussion, constantly. There's not a single customer that is not considering AI. At one point, Joe mentioned earlier that Schneider Electric is one of the biggest software company in the world, but also you've mentioned, Joe, that the majority of the organization are now IT as a prime component of their organization. And I totally agree with that. If you think about almost any industry, any company, it's an IT company in the back end with a different logo on the front, and some are doing, super modern agriculture, some are doing super modern banking, and so on. So the currency here is having access to your data to really maximize your AI ML use. So we're definitely seeing several use cases of the use of AI and generative AI for different organizations. Every organization needs to be thinking about it. Like AI is in many cases now a board-appointed priority for our customers. It drastically changed the way they interact with their customers. It drastically changed how they can increase internal productivity, and it drastically changed how they are changing their operational process. So if you come back to that importance of data for organization, now like what the team is doing with like help of like organization like CDW is really to think about what are the different data silos for our customers. Like, and sometimes like the data asset are stuck into legacy application and like application logs and IoT sensors, and we need to be able to connect to those data, act on the data. So like make sure that if we're going before we act on it, some data might be subject to some compliancy, extract private information, and then being able to like train your AI ML model on it and so forth. So the importance there, and we've talked about efficiency and complexity, is having a platform that allows you to manage that data from the minute it's been created up to using it in an ML model, and having the right architecture that allows you to do that by bringing the data as close as possible to the compute. So that's, I think, what's the challenges of the AI ML brings to the table, but absolutely every single customers are thinking about it for sure.
And I think that has a real potential to be, again, a huge challenge, not just for individual organizations, but also like for AWS. If 20% of your customers overnight decide that they want to run AI with various bits of their data, that's a huge scaling challenge.
Yeah, and maybe what I can add on that is, if you think about our customer base, like everybody is excited about AI, but there's probably less than 1% of our customers that are, true builders in a sense that they're going to develop their ML model. The majority are enterprise customers that want to use AI and either customize the models to their operational process, or just like buy an ML services. I'm sure that in Schneider Electric Solutions, there's a lot of AI ML embedded. So customers are really looking to leverage it that way. So we need to think about that for our customers, of how do we make AI accessible and practical to use without being, like a science project on its own.
Yeah, and one of the ways that we're defining that is we're really talking about AI as a feature. And so with something like Schneider Electric and being able to gather more insights and more data about what your power consumption is and all of that, where it's baked into a product, we're really saying, well, that's kind of AI as a feature. And I think you're right. We're going to see that more and more and more, whether it's apparent on the surface of the product or whether it's just embedded in the product and helps us be more effective. The other end of the spectrum, as you point out, not a lot of organizations are going to be building, AI as a factory, where I'm going to make my own and I'm going to build, multi-million-dollar clusters and then back end it with a ton of power and cooling requirements and liquid, and we'll kind of get into that. And then it's really, AI as a feature, AI as a function. Which is kind of in the middle, where we're going to take a language model, let's create a function that empowers our people to be better. But you're right. I think it's kind of that sweet spot in the middle where they're going to take advantage of platforms in the public cloud. They're going to take advantage of building that where their data is residing. And then the link back to Joe and Schneider. There's all this great sensor data out there. Like I'm sure Schneider is able to build flows and you're able to see when are those peak periods and what are so there's definitely a lot to that. So I guess what are some of the Joe, when we're looking at this, what are some of the questions that organizations or customers need to be asking themselves as they're looking to grow, at the edge in the public data center, in the colo? What are some of the questions they should be asking themselves that they need to really address in order to be successful?
Great question. There's a lot there. I think it first starts out with the application. What is it that they want to go solve or go do? And it starts with that technical application first, right? And so based on that, everything else springboards from that, meaning, okay, I have this application, I want to do whatever, same day delivery drone. Let's just pick something out there, right? Okay, so they identify that's what they want to go do. Second thing is, what is the IT, or what is the requirements in order to go do that? Third thing is, what locations do I need to be able to go and do that with? And then it basically comes down to this, right? It's the business model, the business case, and how I think people are solving that or looking to solve that is this. This is why Amazon is really successful and others. Look, there's a certain allure to standardization, rinse and repeat. If I have to go do this and have a one-off, and let's say they want to go do this stuff, but there's a one-off in every single place that they go do that, that's not effective, efficient, nor capable, and to be able to actually go do that, right? So those are the things that, again, we're being asked to look at and solve. With our clients, it's just, again, what are the business requirements? What's the resiliency need? What's the speed, latency? What then drives the location? What then drives how do we build it? And it's all an ecosystem. And I will say one other thing. We mentioned software. We mentioned IoT. Look, said simply, the smarter something is, your doorbell. Okay, that's connected to something. Nothing gets connected without compute, network, and storage. Period. risk, whether it's wireless, whether it isn't. And so the more things become connected, to Martin's point, the more data there is available. And here's the thing that everybody's thinking about and trying to solve, is that there is a bazillion things available data-wise today, but they are in silos. Power is with power, mechanics with compute, network are all in silos, kind of. But what everybody's learning, like, holy cow, when the power goes down, the compute does something. And when compute does something, it draws power, which causes heat. The chiller does something. And so I'll just leave it high level. Everything is starting to converge. It's IT, OT, it's compute, network, and storage, it's business, it's application, and it's infrastructure that are all together. And if you did it the old way, the Kentucky Derby way, you're going to be higher cost, you're going to be quicker, slower time to market, you're going to have higher risk, and you're going to have lower business productivity. I know that's a provocative statement, but Martin is shaking his head yes, because he knows. That is, and I just challenge people because, when we sit across the table and work as a team, instead of saying your power, your cooling, your network, your storage, and go do your thing, this is where the value comes. This is where the business value comes. Because all this relates to business value, right, and risk, okay? And these are the things our clients wake up at night to think about. They don't worry about whether it's 65U or 48U or whatever. They don't worry about that. They leave it up to Martin and CDW and Schneider to help them with. What they worry about is the business value, the risk, their business continuity, and the resiliency. This ecosystem is responsible to bring that to life.
Yeah, it's a good point. And one of the things that we talk about more and more with customers is building like centers of excellence. And so one of the ways that organizations have started to sort of bridge that gap, so rather than having people running in their lane with blinders on, is bringing people from various parts of the business together. Your development team, your operations team, your leadership, and your business owners. Like, bring them together and really focus on that. So I guess, from your team working directly with the customers to kind of go through these, this discovery, what are some of the questions that customers need to ask as they're looking to grow and scale? And part of my mind is it's kind of a buy versus build mentality. I think that there's still some legacy. Well, we want to build it because then we own it. The challenge with that is, as Joe mentions, is it's really hard to be an expert in all of the different layers that you require. That somebody like AWS, who has expertise at those layers already, it becomes more of a buy conversation. So like, what are some of the questions that you want customers really asking or having answers for as they look to innovate?
I think it starts with changing some of the perspective, like you talked about, like creating COEs or even customers changing their mindset. Whereas in the past, if they had like physical data center, like everything was the same. Like there was kind of like one t-shirt size for everything. Whereas like you have two data centers, like I can split my application between those two data centers, and everything goes like that. Where when you think about the cloud, you need to think about like what is your RPO, RTO requirement for each application, because the cloud will allow you to architect at the application level for the specific requirements of that application. And we have a mental framework when we're working and building solutions like that in order to how to be very frugal about the architecture that you're building, so that it's frugal from a cost perspective, it's frugal from a sustainability perspective, but also it's highly resilient and meets the application level of that architecture for that specific application. So I think the discussions start from having the right understanding of what is the severity of that application in terms of the business needs of the business. And we can even also, in some aspect, take an application and break that application into sub-product. Mm-hmm. So for instance, I'll give you an example. If you think about the Amazon application, mm-hmm. right? Pretty sure everybody have used it, so like we have a common mental model there. If you think about it, there is some functionality within that application that are critical. That mm-hmm. if you like, without the search engine, you're not going to be able to do anything. Without the payment services, you're not going to be able to do anything. But there's other components that are maybe not that critical. Let's say if you don't have access to the review of the product, that might not be as critical. You're still able to do your purchase and carry forward, and without that service. And if you think about so think about an application, and is it critical? Are you able to break down that application to sub-products? And then how do you architect in a very frugal way those applications and those sub-products so that you can achieve like the business outcomes, but make economies of scales? Maybe it's not everything that needs to be like multi-AZ or multi-region, because those bring complexity and it brings cost up. If your listeners want to learn more a little bit about that concept is called the frugal architecture. And okay. That was part of Werner Vogel's keynote last year at reInvent. And you can just go and type thefrugalarchitect.com, mm-hmm. and it's going to bring you to those considerations of when you're architecting a solution, how do you think about cost optimization, scalability, mm-hmm. performance, security, compliance, and bring that type of architecture, and don't just sometimes look at it at the broad application, but how can you break that application to subcomponent?
Yeah, and I think that really kind of harkens back to what Joe was talking about with right-sized, and so not just right-size your overall application, but right-size the components of your application. That's a really interesting way of looking at it, I think. So yeah, so I think that's great. And then we're going to move on and talk about some of the ways that we architect and design and scope around some of these challenges. But Joe, what's your impression on liquid cooling? I mean, it seems like as we work with some of our larger hardware partners, I'm seeing more liquid cooling in rack. I'm seeing more liquid cooling with heat exchanges on the roofs of buildings. I'm seeing more liquid cooling down to the chip. What are you seeing in that space, and how is that maybe changing the way we design and lay things out and within our data centers?
Well, when you think about liquid cooling and specifically that direct to chip, think about how much more concentrated both the heat and the cooling removal or that heat removal is. It's very pointed. And if you think about it just abstract, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to go, wow, that's probably more efficient. That could be more efficient than just blowing air all over the place and hoping it gets to the right place. Your point, you know where the heat is and you're cooling it very directly. And I think that it's a broad brush statement because there's a lot of variables that need to play into this, but by and large, liquid cooling can be much more sustainable, much more efficient than the traditional air cooling, in particular, which is blowing around with not a significant science to it necessarily. And we see that this helps bring to life the IT kit in some cases. So if the silicon manufacturer comes out with this high density chip that requires liquid, if you aren't able to do that, that piece of equipment doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Okay, so again, this whole story about, this ecosystem wants all these silos, actually not anymore. And, liquid cooling is very important to the performance and the capability for that piece of equipment to operate at its maximum, to do its most efficient compute performance. So it's very important, in particular in the much higher density applications. And I'm not going to use the word AI because there are other types of high density type of applications that aren't AI that can use and would require that use of liquid cooling. Again, think of it this way. The chip is different, right? It's gone from a CPU to a GPU, right? That created a whole lot of requirements for power to be delivered to that thing at a much higher capacity. And then, of course, the more power you put into an area, the more heat that you got to consider. And so, once again, if this thing was designed independently between the silicon people that do power, and people that do cooling, we would probably be missing a whole lot, and we probably wouldn't have it optimized. Today, those groups, including the likes of Amazon and Schneider and Amazon partner quite well on a lot of this. Okay, is to really work together, and that again, that right-sized, optimized design. And as Martin talked about, and I loved it, I thought it was just perfect, as he gave the example of Amazon versus a payment, versus the search, versus a review. Remember what I talked about at the beginning, that data centers were built all the same. If it was tier 4, all of it was tier 4. Well, if you just abstractly layer that down into what Martin talked about, because the ecosystem works and communicates as a unit today, now then I might have a large failure domain in a data center that typically would have had full redundancy, battery backup, diesel, all of that. Okay? And so just coming all back to this whole thing, there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of new things that are helping create the ability for CDW, Amazon, the silicon people to put together the compute, the network, and storage that enables the business outcomes for the clients in the world. And then how that matriculates into the world of power and cooling, a lot has changed. As I said, data centers that are built today don't look the same. They don't operate the same. They have some of the same requirements, but some of the solutions that we see deployed in them today, we never saw even 5 years ago. Liquid cooling, rear door heat exchangers, direct to chip, high density power architecture, not to mention probably the 50,000 things that Martin could tell us on the compute, the network, and the storage that's different than what it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think what really jumps out at me, throughout the conversation is architecture matters. Architecture on the application side of things, architecture in the data center, getting the teams together to architect, and I think it's a good point. It's a good call out that even large organizations, like AWS, like CDW, like Schneider, we still have to build partnerships to address this space because it is challenging. So I think that's interesting. So Martin, we talked a little bit about like the Calgary zone and what's been done there. How does AWS keep up with the growth and the demand that your customers have, and how does your team sort of feed into that process? Because if your team's at the with the customers, talking about what their needs are, talking about getting this feedback, how does your team sort of plug into that? And as an organization, how do you scale as quickly as you need to?
Yeah, well, let me start with that. So like the way that we can innovate so fast and like launch new products so quickly is actually 90% of the innovations we do comes directly from customers' feedback. So it's not like if we have teams that scratch their heads like, what are our customers going to need in 2 years? Like we work with customers every day. We take that feedback, and the solutions architect feed those feedback directly into our service teams, and 90% of the innovations from there. Probably another 10% is like thought leadership and where we see this going, and we pair this together, but that is a crucial aspect of the velocity of innovation. Of course, from how do we keep it? There's massive investment into the regions, the network, and all of that. We invest a lot as well. Joe talked about the silicon. Like, we invest a lot into our hardware as well. We're now at our 4th generation of silicon from an ARM processing perspective on Graviton. A few years back, we launched our AI/ML chip, Trainium and Inferentia. We're now at a 2nd version of that, so that helps with densification, helps with lowering the cost. It's actually the best price, performance, and environmental footprint processors that you can find in the market. So if you pair all those dimensions together, it keeps us really innovating and progressing at fast pace.
Very cool. And then Joe, when you think about some of the larger customers, like AWS that Schneider supports, how are you working with those providers to really partner and move that innovation forward?
Schneider Electric partners with our clients in a number of ways. From sustainability, we were very honored and fortunate to be voted by Time Magazine the most sustainable company in the world. We take great pride in that. We work with our clients on their sustainability ambitions and goals and help them set their targets and achieve those targets. We work in partnership, I can say, directly with Amazon sits on the with iMasons and a climate accord, right? Driving sustainability in data centers, driving change, driving metrics in that. We partner with the likes of Amazon on their, you asked Martin, how did Amazon scale? He talked about it from the compute network side. Let me tell you, on the other side, they have Amazon is a world-class supply chain. And so they partner with a world-class supply chain like Schneider. They give us a transparent funnel of what their build forecast be in the next 5 years. And so then we can work on buying raw material to support our client, so that when they're ready to build, they have the materials and the things, the technological bricks to build. Okay, and so again, this is why I say, look, if you haven't figured out by now, the theme is together we're better than we are independently. You can't scale. Amazon would have a very difficult time scaling if they just surprised the world and said they need 600 gigawatts of some power thing in a month. There's no way they could do that. And so there's no way the world can respond to that either. So how the community, this includes CDW, how the community is responding globally in the United States, in Canada, on scale, on technical problems, cooling, power, blah, 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 is by breaking down the walls of vendor, client, everybody becomes partner, everybody's working together, transparency, honesty, and really putting all of our heads together to figure out how do we all together do this, because Amazon could have the greatest, all of that in the world, but if they can't get the land, if they can't get the power, if they can't get the mechanical, electrical equipment, they could have all of the compute in the world, but it will do no good. So the way that we are helping the world scale is just by being, I would say, a good corporate citizen and becoming partners versus vendors, okay, and all working together for the common good. And that's the way I would like to say that, because you have to have both. You can't just have You can't just have power. You can't just have. You got to have them both. And if you do, then you can solve the problems. Then you can solve what the clients are looking for. You can move at speed. You can and do it in a really sustainable way. So that is how Schneider Electric works and partners with Amazon as well as CDW on supply chain forecast, what the market is, and I think I'll leave you with this. I think all three organizations that are represented here do this really well. Somebody mentioned at the beginning of the call, one of the greatest hockey players of all time, of Mario Lemieux. And my link to this conversation is this. I'm a weird dude, as you already probably figured out. Mario Lemieux was incredibly successful because he knew where the puck was going to go and he went there. He didn't focus on where the puck was. I would suggest, with a pretty tangible track record behind me, Amazon, CDW, and yes, I'm Schneider, but I believe it fully and we have a tangible track record too. The success of our companies and the partnership of us is because we have people like Martin and KJ and your organization that drive Amazon forward, that drive CDW forward, because we're looking where the puck is going to go, and we try to work together to get us an open shot on that when the puck eventually gets to us.
Yeah, and I'll take ownership. I'm a huge Mario Lemieux fan. So yeah, we were talking about hockey before we got on the podcast, and Joe is a Buffalo Sabres fan, and Martin, we assumed Montreal Canadiens.
Absolutely.
Fan. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And
now they don't make it easy for us to be fan these days, but that's another story.
It's true. We can all probably commiserate this year. So yeah, I guess one of the things we haven't necessarily touched on is when we do have that greenfield opportunity, how does redesigning the data center really benefit us? So Martin. If we're looking at greenfield and you mentioned in Calgary, having that capacity there, you kind of went into it thinking there was a certain type of business or organization that was going to grow there, and it's really been different from that. How has that as a greenfield, maybe been different than what your expectations were? Can you quantify that a little bit?
Well, yeah. Well, the initial assumption. And still is, but like the initial assumption is like we really need to have a second region in Canada because the majority of our customers in the financial sector, in the public space, have data regulation requirements of data that needs to stay in Canada, and there's some legislation also that is happening that is going to reinforce that. So we definitely see adoption from those customers, but we're also seeing a larger adoption from large ISVs, small ISVs in Canada, so like software builders that really want to deploy software closer to the edge. And those were kind of also, like you mentioned, like greenfield customers that we didn't realize that anticipation of, oh yes, like I have near real-time application that needs to run near to the edge. There's a lot of industrials companies out west in Alberta that needs to have that near real-time customer experience. So that was a very positive surprise. A lot of small, medium businesses adopting the region at fast pace as well. So it's just been a really positive experience for us to see that. And now what we're trying to do with those customers is the way that we launch our regions is all regions are not created equal. They are creating with a certain base of services, and then we work on customer demands to add services to the region. So if you would compare the Calgary region to the Canada region, Canada Central, there's a big difference in terms of quantity of service. There's about 200 services in Canada Central. There's over 100 services already in Calgary. But now what we're trying to do is really be better understanding some of the use cases that are happening in Calgary, so that we're proactive of launching some of the key services that are missing for those specific use cases aligned to the Western Canada industries that are there.
Yeah, and so it's interesting to see that grow and not the way you necessarily thought. Are there any, when you look at the actual, region that you've built, how does that compare to, say, some of the older regions from a technology perspective? We talked about sort of greenfield and then brownfield, and are there any sort of differences that you and the team notice?
Well, there's few, but for the most part, it's abstracted to our customers, right? The customers consume our services, and we try to abstract as much as possible anything that has related to the infrastructure or the software stack behind. What I can tell you is, in the past, maybe surprisingly, a lot of the deployment of a region was relatively services by services. There was some form of automation, but not that many, whereas the Calgary region was one of the first regions that was almost fully automated. So from the day that we've launched, a few days after, there was more than 100 services being active in the region. So that level of automation is really allowing us to deploy region really fast. And of course, what you'll find when we have older regions, if you will, there's a lot of more legacy type of instances, type of compute. There's a broad array of instances, whereas in the new region, obviously, we're launching with the most dense and more modern type of compute there.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's almost like having that technical debt, but being able to not bring all of that over to a new location. And then Joe, as you're, if you go in and you're building a greenfield data center today, whether that's a hyperscaler, whether that's for a large customer, how is that different than previously, and what are some of the things that maybe you're doing in that architecture that you wouldn't have done 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. I'll start with today, and this is no secret. There's a utility constraint, and so right away in the past okay, what was the voltage from the utility? It was there, boom, done. But now the data center design is actually starting at the utility level, and so right now there's a lot, including with the hyperscalers, design and what's called back of meter power. Okay, it's very public actually. So not saying anything out of line here, but you can Google some of the hyperscalers or research some of the hyperscalers and see what they're doing in relative to co-location, which means that they're perhaps contemplating building right next to a power generation facility. Mm-hmm. And so the data center designs actually are starting at the grid level now, whereas before it always started at the line of this is the property line and the data center is going to be built here. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is the interactivity. How does that data center act with the grid? The load profiles of some of the higher density IT equipment is very different than how the load profile electrically from cloud infrastructure looked. That is a discussion directly with the utility. How is this building going to behave on my grid? Mm-hmm. Okay, these are all, let's call it much more enriched discussion today than ever before. Okay, so it starts there, and then once you get from there, and then it's everything kind of we talked about before, right? What is Martin and his team requiring for rack density? And then that's driving the technological solutions to how to deliver power to that rack, how to remove the heat from that rack, okay? And then really important too, I think, is the let's call it the resiliency, the redundancy requirements, okay, are a little bit different. Who would have thought about putting UPS on pumps? Nobody, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, but guess what? If you're doing direct to chip and you have a CDU and you lose commercial power, you lose utility, but the thing was working, where does the heat go? And the answer is it doesn't go anywhere unless you have the pump pushing water through that. So guess what? Wow, wait. I don't need a UPS on my IT kit, but wait, I need something on the pumps. So I just give you some example, okay? High level, as to that's what our team is having deep discussions, design solutions and architectures from the grid, and I say to the chip, and now you see why I say to the chip. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
changing completely.
I can imagine that if you did have a situation where the pump went down but the power did not, frying all those chips would not be what you wanted. So we're gonna pivot from kind of the current state. We talked about a lot of what we're doing. Both historically. We talked a little bit about some of the challenges and the ways we're mitigating those. And I like that from the grid to the chip. I think that's a really interesting area we could explore in a ton more detail. But I want to pivot to sort of the future state. So, if we look at things like AI workloads, we talked about how they're kind of a problem child within the data center, and GPUs really being such a consolidation of power and needing attention. Sorry. Apologize. If AI chips are a bit of a problem child, what is quantum going to do in the data center? And so I guess the first question is, are you having conversations with customers in preparation for quantum workloads that they may be consuming?
Yeah. Now, I'm not an expert in quantum. But yeah, I think it's a growing topic. Like AWS have a service on quantum. The way that you need to look at quantum is like think about it as the AWS infrastructure and availability zone and environment is like that massive highway, right? In facility is storage, networking, and now we're bringing that massive capability of computing on top of it. But to like Joe's interest and perspective, like at a massive lower energy cost and requirement. So it is getting to be a subject of discussion. I think it's still niche, but we're definitely investing into the technology. You're seeing it as a capability in some of our regions, and every year you'll see more and more advancements on it.
And then Joe, when you were talking about the supporting the build pipeline of these data centers, are you guys already planning quantum support infrastructure? Like is that how is that impacting what some of your team is doing from an architecture perspective?
Well, I'm similar to Martin. I'm not a quantum expert here, but to answer the question, all right. So look, the market's growing, whether it's driven by more cloud, more AI, potentially quantum. Okay. As a manufacturer, we absolutely have our eye towards that market and what that need would mean as far as for us on some of this. So similar to kind of AWS and how Martin's looking at it. So I'm not going to suggest that we have something on a slide that says quantum growth 17 bazillion gigawatts, and therefore we got to do, it's all sort of part of, let's just say, this digitization growth. Because I think it covers all. Martin talked about cloud. We've now touched on AI. Now we're getting into quantum. The common denominator is it's all IT. Okay, right? And this is all growth, and we're not going to go back to beepers. We're probably not going to go back to payphones. We're darn sure not going back to the horses delivering the mail. So, we don't have to be crazy rocket scientists to think the future is smarter things doorbell, lights, whatever it is, the smarter things become, the more compute, the network, and storage it requires. What it is, if it's quantum or AI or whatever, it's digital. Okay, it's a digital future. The growth is exponential. Okay, and that's how we, and I would say probably Amazon and CD, that's how we look at this thing, and not necessarily because we're not a silicon maker directly into app, or whether it's AI or quantum or this. Those folks are doing that, but that's how we address it. Probably similar to how Martin and Amazon kind of look at it as well.
Yeah, and and then again, as we kind of look to the future, what are some of the things that are kind of exciting for you and AWS? And this isn't necessarily like tied to anything specifically, but what as we go forward into 2025, what are some of the things that are exciting for you and the team?
A lot of stuff, but like I guess I'm both as much excited and humble about what's to come. Like for sure, like there's many things to look at there. From an AI ML perspective, I'm sure like you're witnessing it every month, how innovation happens fast in that space, and just look at generative AI and the LLMs that leapfrog each other every single month with new, absolutely mind-blowing capabilities. That's really exciting in terms of the capability that it brings. You talk about quantum, like this is also, so I expect to see much more adoption in the future. Sustainability as well is a key dimension that we talked about a little bit, that we're seeing more and more this as a priority for our customers and us. Like what Joe mentioned, by the way, kudos, it's a major, massive achievement to be recognized most sustainable company there, so congrats. It's also a big priority for AWS. Amazon overall made a commitment toward a climate pledge, which is to be 10 years in advance of the Paris Agreement. Some of that, if you bring that to AWS level, we had the objective of having all our regions and data center to be carbon neutral by 2030, and we've actually achieved this in 2023. So I think the pace at which technology is able to condense and allow us to be more and more efficient is super exciting as well. And then overall, just seeing the impact that we're having with our customers on bringing all those technologies together and helping them reshape their businesses is really what's getting me up in the morning and make this job the most fascinating in the world.
Yeah, and I didn't realize, I like that, such a high percentage of your innovation is really coming at the behest of your customers. I think that's I think we should all try to be, delivering for our customers that way. And then Joe, sort of the same question to you. What's changing in the future? What's exciting in the space, and what kind of gets you up in the morning? I'm
gonna not take the easy way out here, but everything that Martin said was spot on. I think if you asked me first, I probably would have said a lot of those same things. I'm an optimist. I'm really excited because I see the behavior of our industry changing. I kind of wove that in all this entire podcast is that, look, we're, in order to do some of the things that carbon neutral by 2030 and major steps in sustainability, is that we work together, and that so I'm really excited that we actually are doing that today. The buying behavior of clients are changing. Used to be always 3 bids and a buy. Now it's more partners and supply capacity agreements, and really looking to the future and optimizing that. I think that the future holds some really significant improvements with what we're doing because of those things, that we all work together and we think of it in the same way. And then just to be really provocative and maybe end with something kind of funny or cool, Amazon came out with this thing called Alexa, this little tube we talked into in our home. So you asked me, what am I kind of excited about? What am I thinking about? So I'm looking forward for the Amazon personal assistant robot that I could maybe have walk the dog so that, it's really super cold out and I don't. So I make fun or add that as what I'm looking forward to. But I say that because, I think that there are some significant technological advancements and improvements that will come to help the quality of life for a lot of people. We always want to talk about all this, but look, I just think about, weird that, the eight are we have elderly people and the technology advancements that are coming, helping them, and their quality of life is better, and advancements in medical, and that's what I look forward to, right? Those are the things. Those are the output of what we all kind of talked about today. Everything we talked about, to me, with no disrespect to network or cooling or power or any of that stuff, those are all the enablers to allow that to happen. And what I'm looking forward to and really excited about is the improvement for human quality of life and the betterment of our planet. I know that sounds corny, okay, but everything that we talked about today enables that stuff, and that's what I'm excited about. Okay, I know I'm weird, but
do you mind if I throw one more, because you just inspired me on one thing there, and I think it talks to what you talked there, Joe. It's really partnership, and I think it's we do that by better partnering together, like with CW, Schneider. This is how we're going to be able to solve those problems faster for our customers and bring those innovations. So I think putting more brilliant minds to the problem and thinking about our customer problems, it's the way to go.
Yeah, and Joe, you touched on something. One of the interesting statistics, we just did a survey around generative AI and how that's impacting people in the workplace. And what we found in that survey is for people with disabilities, Gen AI is actually having a greater impact on helping them with their productivity than any other of the groups of people that we surveyed. So going into it, we weren't sure how to quantify that, and coming out of the survey. So you're right, the technology is having an impact. It is driving value. Okay, so last question. Martin, are there feeds that you take in? Are there things, like the blogs that you look at? You mentioned the frugal architecture, sort of methodology. But what are some of the things that you use to keep up with the change of technology and just new ideas? Is there anything that you'd recommend people check out?
Well, I have the fortune to be at AWS, so we do have a lot of content internally that I'm fortunate to having that constant source of information. There's not a specific one. I'm just a learner that is going to go on listening a variety of podcasts and blogs and always be looking out for good information. That's pretty much how I operate.
All right, no worries. Yeah, and I kind of dabble all over the place too. Joe, is there anything that you recommend, or maybe something Schneider puts out that people can check in on?
Yeah, there's I'm similar to Martin. We're lucky to be in such a great company. We have unbelievable CTOs across our business and thought leaders, and so I'm lucky to get that as well. I maybe I'll add something. I would encourage people to think outside their lane. And here's what government regulation, government policy. Martin touched on data sovereignty, regulations. Understanding what policymakers are thinking about, and I would encourage people to do that, because what you'll find is holy cow. I'll give you an example on this power thing. There's a whole lot of activity across many states, whether it's the Texas Senate committee, whether it's the PERC ruling recently, out in PG&E's territory, some really great things. But look at what policy, thought, regulation, because I think this is a significant value add. And people don't tend to want to do, they're looking at the next GPU article about a robot that can walk the dog. Okay, great, that's awesome. But so I just say, well, broaden your scope, because like Martin, you dabble all over the place, and KJ, you do too. That's where you really get. If you just stay focused, I'm a power person, so I just only look at power. I would encourage people to be curious. There's a wealth of information out there, reputable organizations, really good thought leadership, and Schneider has a bunch. We probably have a couple $1 million free white paper library for people that want to get into why should I think about AI? What about economizer? What about diesel generators? Those types of things. AJ, your podcast, the CDW podcast, is a wonderful place for people to listen while they drive, to gain some insights and knowledge, and maybe some weird things as well. So I'll just leave everybody with, listen, curiosity is probably one of the strongest traits and most admirable traits to learn and to grow and to develop and to be curious beyond your swim lane.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I like the reference to a mental model earlier. I think having a flexible mental model, asking questions, and then really incorporating that into your day to day. So Martin, I want to thank you for jumping in on this. I really appreciate you coming in.
Great.
And Joe, it was great to have you on the podcast, and I really appreciate you bringing your thought leadership. I really appreciate both of you coming in. And so that's been our episode of the CDW Canada Tech Talks podcast. I'm your host, KJ Burke. Thanks again to Martin. Thanks again to Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Really appreciate you guys. You guys have a great one. Be safe. Stay inquisitive. Stay curious. Have a mental model that you can easily adjust. And we'll catch you on the next podcast.